Hi and welcome back to Bike Speed. So this week we had this cube mountain bike in, needed a service, it had squeaky brakes, which you'll hear now. And it had a puncture. So we start off our service by doing all the bolts and things on the handlebars and stem. So this is just torquing up all the fittings, the brake levers, the shifters, all those components on the handlebars to make sure they're right. The saddle, this is like everything above the top tube, and now we're just removing this wheel. The first thing we're going to deal with is the puncture. One thing I did notice on both front and rear wheels is the logos here do not line up with the valves, and it's just a pet hate of mine. The front was worse than the back, but when we did this puncture we did actually line those back up. So the thing I found, a simple thing, that thorn there was all that was causing this puncture. But you can be proactive, you can go around your tyre and pick out any pieces like this, because they'll gradually work through the tread and eventually give you a puncture. So you can kind of be proactive in your pre-riding checks by going around the tyre and picking out anything like that, and it will just stop that going through the tyre. So simple inner tube, line up that logo, inflate the tyre, and that's stage one of the rear tyre and wheel and brake and everything done. Next up we remove the quick release and just give the cassette a torque. Now you can see here this grooving on this disc. This is the most common reason for a squeaking brake. So initially we try a brake cleaner on the disc, and you'll see this rag comes out quite black. There's a lot of road film that's on that disc. That could be one of your number one problems. But you can see we've still got this grooving. It acts like an old vinyl record. It literally sings away as you push the brake. So the first thing you need to do is to remove those grooves from your disc. And you can be quite harsh with this. I'm using here a dry 80 grit paper. It's actually been on our belt sander, which you'll see me using shortly. It's probably more like 120 grit now. It's much smoother than original. So I rub that down and then I give that a wipe over again with the brake cleaner, just to really get any final film from even my sanding down off. So you can see this disc now has not got any grooves, and that's ready to be refitted. The quick release was quite rusty on this one, so I just wire-walled the surface rust off there, and the lever itself was a bit stiff, so we oiled that lever. Then we greased the shaft that goes through the wheel, because it can end up sticking inside and that can cause all sorts of problems. A little bit of copper slip on the end, a little bit of grease on the springs because they were going rusty, and a little bit of sort of surface grease on there will future proof that from going rusty. And next up we remove the pads. So the first thing we do is to give them a wipe with brake cleaner, which we do here, and you'll see on the rag there they're quite black, lots of road film on there, but you can see the pad surfaces are still black as can be. So the next stage would be to wire brush them. This gets off any road film around the edges of it, so you can see they're already looking better. But then I just give them a little skin on our belt sander, and that will bring them up like new, remove all that initial road surface film, and you can see there they look as good as new on the surfaces. So again, we're removing any road film on this caliper with a brake cleaner. So it's sort of a job where you kind of work your way through it until you know everything is where it should be. The other thing I just did with this bike was the pads weren't that warm, but I did just measure front and rear just to see which were thickest, and I actually swapped them round because the rears were wearing faster than the fronts. I just swapped the fronts to the back just to give them a bit more wear. Now I put a little bit of copper slip on here because you can see the difference there. That ring on the right hand one is rust from the pistons inside this caliper. So a little bit of copper slip on there. It's a high heat, high energy grease, so it will never come off. That noise you can hear there is where the caliper isn't quite central to the disc. So that's it afterwards. You can see the wheel is spinning freely in the caliper. It just stops that when you pull the pads there on left and right not evenly, so that can cause that singing sound. So next up we realised the gears weren't changing very well, so we took out a chain link from the chain because it was just a little bit slack on the lower gear. That didn't work. We realised the B screw was loose. That didn't solve it, so now we're moving on to changing the cable. It's an internal routed cable, so a little bit fiddly going through the frame here, but there's ways and means, so we just use a little bit of tubing there to guide it, and you can see that comes out. So out comes the old cable. Now these clips, someone had put tie wraps on there. They're great for holding them sturdy, but the idea of the clips that are on these frames is they're a little bit sacrificial. If you catch that cable on undergrowth or whatever, it'll just flick the cable clips off and won't damage your cable. So long term you're better off with these cable clips, which we replaced them back to how they should be. The cable clips, like I say, they're just a little bit sacrificial. They just work better long term. Although they do pop off, equally they don't damage your cable when they do that, so it's a better way to ride your bike rather than using tie wraps, which I see daily really, but it's not the best practice. So now we're just adjusting everything, going through with the torque wrench, all the various fittings and everything on the bike, including the caliper posts and spacers, etc. So we're quite happy there. Just check the bottom cages, and again we had this cable here where the clips were missing because they'd done their job, so we just replaced those with new ones, and the bottom one was a cable tie, so we just did that. And then we just give this bike a wash down. Everything now is looking good on it. All the logos are lined up on the tyres. The brakes are no longer squealing. The gears are now working perfectly. Everything's torqued up as it should be, so a little wash down does it no harm. I actually quite enjoy washing bikes if I'm totally honest about it, so I don't mind doing this at the end of a service. We now lubricate everything. We have one level of service. You know, I think if you want a bike serviced, you want it done. I literally charge one price. I don't have a tiered system for servicing. This is a regular service that we do. And then we just finally give that a little detail with some silicone spray, which will just stop it getting dirty quickly later. And you can see now this bike looks absolutely perfect, and we'll show you shortly the brakes no longer squealing, and this is a before and after of that. Perfect. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.